The day my son told me he was getting married, I smiled, hugged him, and said all the right things. What I didn't say, what I never said to anyone, was that 6 months earlier, I had quietly transferred every asset I owned into a revocable living trust, not because I suspected anything, not because I was afraid, just because my financial advisor had suggested it after my husband passed, and something in me had listened. Thank God I listened. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 63 years old, I live alone in the house my late husband and I bought in 1987, and I have spent the last 4 years learning slowly and painfully what it means to become invisible to the people you love most. My husband, George, died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in October. He was making coffee. I was upstairs getting dressed. By the time I came downstairs, he was on the kitchen floor, and the coffee was still brewing. 41 years of marriage, and it ended that fast. The paramedics came, the neighbours came, my son came, driving 2 hours from Charlotte with his girlfriend, who would later become my daughter-in-law. And I remember thinking, even then, in the fog of that terrible day, that something about the way she looked at our house made me uneasy. Her name was Tara. She was 31, worked in pharmaceutical sales, and had the kind of smile that arrived slightly before her actual feelings did. My son Brandon adored her. He had always been the kind of man who adored completely, his father's trait, honestly, and I had spent enough years watching George love people who didn't always deserve it to recognize the pattern. But I said nothing. She wasn't unkind to me in those early days. She brought a casserole. She helped me sort through some of George's clothes. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "We're going to take such good care of you." And I nodded and thanked her and told myself I was being uncharitable. 6 months after George died, my financial advisor, a woman I had known for 15 years, sharp and no-nonsense, the kind of person who speaks to you like you are fully capable of understanding your own finances, sat me down and walked me through something called a revocable living trust. She explained that it would keep my assets out of probate, give me full control during my lifetime, and protect everything I'd built from the complications that sometimes arise when families go through transitions. "What kind of transitions?" I asked. She looked at me over her reading glasses. "Any kind," she said. I signed the paperwork on a Thursday afternoon. The house went into the trust. My investment accounts went into the trust. The small rental property George and I had purchased in 2009 went into the trust. I was the trustee. I was in control. And then I went home, made myself a cup of tea, and didn't tell a single soul. Brandon and Tara got engaged that spring. The wedding was the following September, a beautiful outdoor ceremony at a vineyard outside Asheville, 200 guests, white fairy lights strung through the trees. Bran crying when he saw her walk down the aisle. I cried too. Whatever my reservations, that moment was happy as I wanted him to stay that way. The trouble started quietly, the way trouble usually does. It began with small comments. Tara mentioning casually that the drive to my house was getting long, even though they had made that drive without complaint for 3 years. Then a conversation at Christmas dinner about how a lot of women your age were moving closer to family. Then Brandon, my son, who never in his life spoken to me this way, suggesting that I might want to think about simplifying. Simplifying what? I asked. "You know, Mum, the house is a lot to manage alone. The yard, the maintenance, square feet. I had a lawn service. I was not struggling." I told him I was fine. He nodded in a way that suggested he did not entirely believe me. After that dinner, I started paying closer attention. I noticed that whenever I mentioned a home repair, Tara's ears seemed to sharpen. When I had the roof inspected routine, the inspector said everything looked good. She asked how much it cost and then was quiet for a long moment. When I mentioned that I was thinking about taking a trip to see my college roommate in Savannah, she said, "Oh, that's a long drive for one person," in a voice that sounded concerned but felt like something else. I am 63 years old. I drove myself to Savannah. I had a wonderful time. But the comments kept coming, and they started to accumulate into a shape I recognized, a shape that said, "We think you cannot manage your own life." The conversation that changed everything happened on a Sunday in February, about 14 months after the wedding. Brandon and Tara came for lunch. I made pot roast, which had always been Brandon's favourite. We sat at the same table where he had done his homework as a boy, where George had read the newspaper every morning for 30 years, and somewhere between the meal and the coffee, Tara put a manila envelope on the table. "We wanted to talk to you about something," she said. I looked at the envelope. I looked at my son. Brandon was looking at the table. "We've been doing some research," Tara continued, "and we think it might be a good idea for you to give Brandon power of attorney over your finances, just as a precaution, so that if anything ever happened, there would be no delays, no complications." I said, "Nothing has happened." "Of course not," she said. "That's exactly why now is the right time, before anything does." She opened the envelope and slid a document across the table. It was a durable power of attorney form, partially filled out. Brandon's name already typed into the designated agent line. I looked at my son. He was still looking at the table. "Did you know about this?" I asked him. He looked up. "We talked about it," he said. "We just thought it made sense." "As a precaution," Tara added. I picked up the document. I read the first page slowly, the way my own mother had taught me to read anything before I signed it. "Then I think about it," I said. I watched something move across Tara's face. It wasn't quite frustration. It was more like recalibration, like someone adjusting their approach mid-conversation. "Of course," she said. "Take your time." That night, after they left, I sat in George's chair in the living room, the old leather recliner I had never been able to get rid of, and I thought about the document, about my son's name already typed in, about the way Tara had opened that envelope with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed the moment. And I thought about my financial advisor and the trust, and the Thursday afternoon I had signed paperwork that I had never mentioned to anyone. I called my advisor the next morning. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Well, good thing we did what we did. Tell me exactly what it means," I said. "If I had signed that form," she explained it carefully. "A durable power of attorney in the wrong hands can give someone significant control over your finances while you are still alive and fully capable." She explained that because my assets were held in the trust, and because I was the trustee, a power of attorney over my personal finances would have had limited reach. But it would have been a foothold, and people who want a foothold rarely stop at one. "Do not sign anything," she said. I told her I had no intention of it. Over the next 3 months, the pressure escalated in ways that were as hard to describe to people who haven't experienced them, because nothing was ever said directly. No one threatened me, no one raised a voice. It was all concern, all love, all "we just want what's best for you, Mom." Tara began forwarding me articles about senior citizens who had been defrauded, articles about the cognitive changes that can accompany grief. One article, and I still think about this one, was about a woman who had seemed perfect right up until she wasn't. Tara sent it with a simple message: "Thinking of you. Just want to make sure you're protected." I saved every message, every forwarded article. I am not sure why I started doing that. Instinct, maybe. Or maybe some part of me had already understood what was happening and was quietly building a record. Brandon called me one evening in April and asked gently whether I had thought any more about the power of attorney. I told him I had consulted with my financial advisor and she had some questions. He was quiet for a moment. Tara did some research, he said. She thinks maybe you should also think about whether the house is really the right long-term situation. What does that mean? Another pause. There are some really nice places, Mom, continuing care communities. You'd have your own apartment, your own space, but there'd be people around and you wouldn't have to worry about. Brandon. My voice was very quiet. I am 63 years old. I am not moving into a continuing care community. Nobody's saying you have to. We're just thinking ahead, I said. I know. After I hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. I thought about the woman I had been at 35, at 45, at 55. I had raised a child. I had managed a household. I had worked as a school librarian for 22 years, and then, after George retired, had gone back to school and gotten a certificate in bookkeeping, and spent 6 years doing the books for 3 small businesses in our county. I had filed my own taxes, negotiated my own mortgage refinance, and sat across from a hospital administrator and advocated for my husband's treatment plan when 2 different doctors had given us 2 different opinions. I was not a woman who needed to be managed, but I also understood by that point that what was happening had very little to do with my actual capabilities. It was about the house. It was about what Tara had looked at on that first terrible day, when she stood in our foyer and took in the built-in bookshelves and the original hardwood floors and the half-acre lot in a neighbourhood where property values had nearly tripled since 1987. That understanding settled into me like cold water. I called my attorney, not my financial advisor, but an estate planning attorney I had been referred to the previous year, and I made an appointment. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. Then he said, "The trust is your protection. Everything in it is managed by you as trustee and cannot be accessed by a power of attorney granted to someone else. The house, the investments, the rental property, all of it is insulated." And if they pushed further? I asked. What would the next step even look like? He was honest with me. In some states, a family member can petition for guardianship or conservatorship if they can demonstrate that an individual lacks capacity to manage their own affairs. It is an extreme measure, and courts do not grant it easily. But it exists, and people have used it. I left his office with a clearer understanding of both my security and my vulnerability. 2 weeks later, Tara called me directly, not Brandon Tara, and asked if she could come by on Saturday. Alone, she had some things she wanted to discuss, woman to woman. I said yes. I also called my financial advisor that afternoon and told her what was happening. Then I called a neighbour and close friend of 30 years, Judy, who has the good sense not to offer opinions she hasn't been asked for, and I told her I might need her to be present. She said she'd bring her famous lemon pound cake and pretend it was a social call. Tara arrived at 2 o'clock on Saturday with a leather portfolio and the kind of energy that people project when they have decided they are being generous. Judy was in the kitchen. I had not told Tara she would be there. We sat in the living room, and Tara placed the portfolio on the coffee table and said, "I want to be honest with you. Brandon and I are worried. We've been worried for a while, and we think there are decisions that need to be made, and we'd rather make them together than have them made for us later, in a situation that's harder for everyone." "What decisions?" I asked. "The house, primarily. We think if you were to sell and we could help you find something smaller, easier to manage, you would have significant liquidity. And that liquidity could be managed in a way that gives everyone peace of mind." Everyone. I noticed that word. "Managed how?" I asked. She opened the portfolio. There was a document inside, different from the power of attorney, something that looked like a financial management agreement with Brandon's name on it. I didn't pick it up. "I want to show you something," I said instead. I got up and went to the small desk in the corner of the living room where I keep my important papers in a locked drawer. I had put the relevant documents there that morning. I came back with a folder and sat down across from her. I opened the folder and placed a copy of the trust document on the coffee table. Then I placed a letter from my attorney summarizing the protections it provided. Then I placed the log I had been keeping, dates, summaries of conversations, copies of the forwarded articles. I watched her look at the papers. I watched her look at me. Then I said as calmly as I could, "My house is not for sale. My finances are not available for management by anyone other than me. And I have documentation of every conversation we have had on this subject over the past several months." She was very still. "I have not involved Brandon in this conversation today," I continued, "because I am giving you the opportunity to end it cleanly. But I want you to understand something, Tara. I signed documents 14 months before this conversation that protect everything I own. Whatever you have been planning, you are not going to find a way through them." Judy chose that moment to appear in the doorway holding the pound cake. "Should I slice it in here or in the kitchen?" she asked. In the mild and pleasant voice she has used her entire life to diffuse situations she has accurately assessed, Tara closed the portfolio. She said almost nothing for the rest of the visit. She left 40 minutes later, citing a commitment she had forgotten. I walked her to the door. She did not meet my eyes. After she was gone, Judy and I sat at the kitchen table with pound cake and coffee, and I told her everything I hadn't told her before. She listened the way old friends do, completely, without filling the silences. When I finished, she said, "I always thought there was something off about her." "I know," I said. "What about Brandon?" That was the harder question. Since the Sunday since February, since the Sunday pot roast lunch, since the moment I watched my son look at the table instead of at me, I called Brandon the next evening. I told him that Tara had come to see me, and what she had brought with her, and what I had shown her. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry, though I wanted to. I told him that I loved him, and that I would always love him, and that my door was open to him always. But I also told him that what had been happening over the past year was not acceptable, and that if it continued, I would be forced to speak with an attorney about my options. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mom, I didn't know she had those documents." I believed him, partly. I also knew that not knowing is sometimes a choice people make, because knowing would require them to act, and acting is difficult when you have built a life alongside someone. "I need you to do better," I said. "Not for me, for yourself." Things were not fixed after that call. They did not become easy and warm and whole again the way the end of a movie would have you believe. Brandon and I have had dinners that were pleasant. We have had phone calls that drifted into something that felt almost normal. There are days when I see my son laughing at something on his phone, and I feel the familiar pull of uncomplicated love. But things have shifted, something fundamental and hard to name. I am no longer waiting to be seen clearly. I have decided to simply continue being who I am and to let that be enough. I keep the trust documents in the locked desk drawer. I have my annual review with my financial advisor every January. I have updated my attorney on this situation, and he knows my wishes, and I know my rights. I planted a kitchen garden last spring, something I had always meant to do and never gotten around to while George was alive. Tomatoes, basil, zucchini, one stubborn rosemary bush that nearly didn't make it through winter but came back in April, small and determined. George would have liked the rosemary. There is a version of this story where I am bitter, where I sit in this house, cataloguing what was attempted and what was lost, where I measures every holiday dinner by what it used to be. I have felt that version. I know its shape, But most mornings, I wake up in the house I have lived in for 37 years, and I make coffee in the kitchen where my husband used to stand, and I look out at the yard that is mine, that has always been mine, that will remain mine for as long as I choose, and I feel something I didn't expect to feel at 63, free. Not free from grief, or from the complicated love I have for my son, or from the particular sadness of understanding that the people closest to you are sometimes capable of things you could not have imagined, but free from the fear of what would happen if someone tried to take what I had built. I know what would happen. Nothing. The trust holds, the garden grows, and I am still, without question, the trustee of my own life.